Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Friday, March 14th, 2025, and this is episode 335. We're going to talk about Trump the Populist. And if you're offended by the title, sorry, but it was sort of like, the heck is a populist? That's how you're supposed to read it. All right. So, in other words, what is a populist? Well, I hit the Mises.org website and looked up populism, and one of the results was a very small article, short article, excuse me, by Joseph Salerno, very well known Mises Institute scholar. And the title of the article is Populism is Not an Ideology. And it was really good. And I quoted much of it. So I'm going to read it to you because it's just really good. And so why, reinvent the wheel, right? So here it is. In critique of populism as opposite of classical liberalism, right? So he's writing this in response to um, someone else who talked about populism as being the opposite of classical liberalism, which is basically what the Mises Institute is all about. Classical liberalism, it's what I'm all about. Anarcho-capitalism, and a different name for it anyway. All right, here we go. Populism is not a right-wing ideology, but a strategy that may be used by any ideological group whose political agenda differs radically from the ruling class. Left-wing populists, such as Fidel Castro and Hugo Chavez, and then there are classical liberal and libertarian populists, such as Thomas Paine, back in American Revolutionary days, and Dr. Ron Paul. Populism is always hated and feared by the political center. The reason is that the center is occupied by those individuals and groups comprising the moderate left wing and right wing who are allies in defending the political status quo and take turns ruling and operating the levers of power to distribute privilege and wealth to themselves and their cronies. Okay? So populism is against the political center, right? The ruling uniparty, right? And that's why you have, so the people we refer to as the Republicrats or the Demopublicans, right? So members of the uniparty, they always seem to collaborate and work together. That's the phenomena where people who pretend to be Republicans, we call them rhinos, RINO, Republican in name only. They're all part of this center, part of perhaps the deep state, as some people might refer to it. I continue. Regardless of ideological bent, populist thinkers and movement builders take to heart, at least implicitly, the profound insight that there is no such thing as an unpopular government, right? You got to be elected, right? They thus set about exposing the moderates who run the state apparatus as a powerful and wealthy elite whose interests are inherently opposed to those of the masses of productive workers and entrepreneurs. In order to grab the attention of people who are not yet fully conscious that they are being exploited, or in Marxian terms, to help themselves develop a class consciousness, it is only natural that populist leaders employ extreme, emotional, and embittered rhetoric. Such inflammatory rhetoric is especially necessary in the US today and most European countries, where the mainstream media, while ostensibly free, operate as a privileged mouthpiece for the government and spew nonstop propaganda designed to camouflage state exploitation of the productive class and to discredit dissenting political movements. Harsh and extreme populist rhetoric, such as that used by Donald Trump, strikes a responsive chord among the U.S. electorate, but not because Americans are subject to irrational bouts of envy, xenophobia, and insecurity brought on by crisis and recessions. Rather, Americans are being awakened to the cold, hard fact that they have been plundered and oppressed by the moderate American globalist political establishment since World War II. There's a lot of to be bitter about. Crushingly high taxes on businesses and individuals, submergence of national sovereignty in international organizations and alliances, fumbling and incompetent government, endless fighting and colonial wars, especially taxes. A final point: once it has penetrated into the public discourse, populism, precisely because it is the only effective political strategy for radical political change, that populism is here to stay. This should be cause for celebration among libertarians who, for the first time since its inception in the mid 1960s, have at their disposal an effective strategy for rolling back the U.S. welfare warfare state. Great article. I mean, it was like everything that I was thinking was so clearly articulated in Joseph Salerno's short piece, which I only shortened a little bit. There was another uh, result in my search result that I thought was interesting, and it was a video, and it's Dan Klein in Populism and Classical Liberalism. Okay, so Dan Klein was the speaker in this video where he talks about populism and classical liberalism. Again, classical liberalism is the subjectivity, the subjective perspective that I use throughout all of my podcast episodes, including my sermons. Okay, and populism would be that sort of grassroots anti-elite establishment movement. Okay, so the outsiders to the political elites. And what he says is he defines populism as a political movement is populist when it portrays itself as being in opposition to corrupt elites. The elites that matter here are especially those of governmental structures. Populists suggest that a governing class have ensconced themselves into positions of power, that the elites network with one another to serve their own interests rather than the common interest, that they have abused their powers. All right, and so that's his definition of populism, a movement uh, against corrupt elites who basically control government and then use it to plunder the rest of us, right? And so they pretend to work for us, they pretend to do things for us, but in reality, they're just working for themselves. And clearly, this is very easy to see. USAID, which was a very, very small part of the government, you can see just how much exploitation there is, how much waste, fraud, and abuse there is in that one small bureaucracy. Now, here's the problem. So Dan Klein looks sort of gets more into the downside of populism. Okay, here it is. Once they have power, what do? Right? They don't really have a policy or an agenda. They're just simply anti-establishment, anti-corrupt elite, right? And so whatever they have done, yeah, we're against that. And so that's not necessarily a policy, right? Or if you put it in my terms, it's not a principle, right? They're just looking at issues, certain issues, like that's their issue, that's their position on this issue. We're on the opposite side, right? And so it's not unified by some kind of principle, which is why sometimes, at least if you're consistent or you're sharing or you're with me in sharing this perspective of classical liberalism, you'll be like, oh, sometimes they seem to know what they're doing and we like what they're doing. And then, nope, nope, that is a terrible position to take, right? And so it goes back and forth. And I think I expressed it earlier as, two steps forward, one step back, two steps forward, three steps back, And so it's kind of hard to know which way they're going to go. And the reason is because there is no policy. And I guess, well, yeah. So I used to think maybe he's a genius and there is some sort of thing going on, but more and more people are just simply saying he's a populist, which implies that there is no real policy, there is no agenda. It's just simply anti-establishment. Now, Dan Klein goes on. He says the populist cannot draw legitimacy from the structure he says is corrupt. Right. So, right, he's criticizing the populist is criticizing the establishment as being corrupt. So once he does win the election, where does the legitimacy come from? It can't come from the structure which he just blasted as being corrupt. So therefore, successful populism, and that is you got elected, tends to be self-negating, right? So once you get into power, now you have to start like contradicting yourself. You said you were going to release the Epstein list, but maybe we won't. We said that we release the JFK files, but maybe we won't, right? And so now what you're beginning to see is that game of blackmail, of using information as leverage to get other people to do certain things. I emphasize seems because things have yet to play out. And I'm still holding on to a little bit of hope that maybe he is playing 5D chess. But it seems like, oh, now he's leveraging information against certain people to get what he wants. So populism is not classical liberalism, but classical liberalism does have a populist facet in the sense that it is anti-corrupt elites, right? But populism is not classical liberalism. And as much as sometimes there's an overlap, and that's where I got sucked in where there was overlap. Ultimately, if you're riding on that classical liberal horse, you will be disappointed by the trail that populism is going to take. Now, as I've been saying throughout this episode, yeah, that explains a lot of Trump and why I am often frustrated, right? He's up against the elites, but now that he has the power which was once used against him, he seems like he's playing the game again. In other words, look, think about it. It came out that 40%, 50% of the FBI was basically working on him and cases related to him, right? I mean, 40% of the FBI was working on January 6th. Seriously? Yeah, it just boggles the mind. Like there was nothing more important than pursuing a fake story. It's just incredible. And we paid for all of that. Right. And so instead of, gutting the FBI, I haven't heard many people getting fired from the FBI, right? They're still playing their game. Kash Patel is in charge. And I saw a headline, I didn't have time to read it, but that he's going nuclear on minor offensives. Like, okay, if you had all this information on all these dirty politicians and all the dirty things that they did, like Adam Schiff, right? Well, why aren't they in jail right now? Why aren't they indicted? Right. And so that's the big question, right? So it seems like, you know, riding the populist wave, the anti-establishment wave, got him in power, put all these people into place. But now, yeah, it's kind of a whimper. Okay. Is it because he's slowly becoming part of the blob or the swamp or whatever you want to call this evil morass? I don't know. But what is for sure is that he lacks a firm ideology or even a firm belief in freedom to guide him and help make him more consistent, right? So going after people for saying things, right? Just because maybe some other country, Israel, right, is saying that, oh, no, you can't say anything bad about it. Even Ukraine, right? That if you say something bad about Ukraine, Ukraine has a conniption fit, right? And maybe it is rumored that they have assassination hit teams here in the United States. I mean, that's kind of crazy, right? It's a very mind-boggling. And to think that also there are a lot of US dollars involved in the training of all these people. It's maddening, really, that we are paying for our own fear. Except it's not a movie, right? And I certainly did not sign up for any of this. So my fear is that when the economy tanks, and it will tank, right? I mean, if you've been following at least commodity markets, a lot of people are saying that something big is happening in the silver market. It breached $34 an ounce, and Arcadia Economics, Vince Lancy, is saying that the next this rise that we're seeing will hit $39 an ounce, which portends big things in the future. I mean, huge economic change. And so when things go bad, when the economy tanks, Trump will be blamed. And then he'll lose all of the support that he was able to get this last election. And so the House and the Senate will flip again in the midterm elections, and we'll have another Democrat as a president 4 years from now. That is my fear. If he had a more solid ideology, right? Like if he was more libertarian oriented, like he said, I'll be the most libertarian president. Well, if he was more libertarian, then he would enable more meaningful and long lasting change. Like he would be able to pacify the anti-Israel, pro-Palestine protest movements, right? To make a deal with them, perhaps, instead of just simply deporting them, because it looks really bad. It comes off really bad. I mean, he could basically push back to everyone in the world. Hey, freedom of speech is freedom of speech, right? But don't worry about it. I mean, what are they going to do, right? And that would be something he could have responded with, right? So I'm still hanging on desperately to whatever little hope that I have of Trump accidentally, finding a way out of this mess. But I have insanely lowered expectations. I don't know if you remember, I think it was in Living Color, a TV sitcom, what's it called, sketch comedy show where Jim Carrey got his start. The Wayans brothers were on there, and they had this thing, lowered expectations, right? It was a dating service, except you got to lower your expectations. It's like the biggest losers in society meet each other, right? So everyone has to have low expectations of what they're going to get. So I have lowered expectations so that this way, which is what I used to always have. So I was always happy with any good news and not surprised at all by any of the bad. And so I never was frustrated because I expected the bad. And so I was and then I was happily surprised and ecstatic when anything good happened, no matter how small it was. Um, so this crazy ride that we're in, that President Trump is providing us with, is great at the very least, because things are so crazy in the world now that even a lot of my eighth graders, uh, are getting interested in the ideas of freedom, right? They told me that, and they told me, number one, that they'll listen to my podcast after they finish eighth grade, because I told them I wouldn't tell them my podcast until after they finish eighth grade. That way, I won't be in this school anymore, and I won't get in trouble with their parents. But so they might listen to this episode one day, and so now I can say that it really warms my heart that they are able to ask me all of these political questions, crazy questions that no one else seems to really know the answers to, or even want to even talk about. So I chalk that up as thanks, President Trump, for being able to enable me to do that. Well, that's it for this episode. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you next time.